Snobby banker mocks a broke customer, but when he learns it's Elon Musk, he panics. It was a bright, crisp morning in downtown Manhattan. The city buzzed with its usual energy, honking cabs, hurried footsteps, and the hum of conversation filling the air. On Wall Street, towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over the sidewalks, their glass windows gleaming in the sunlight. Among the financial giants stood Prestige First Bank, a pristine and exclusive institution known for catering to the wealthy elite. Its marble floors, polished to a mirror-like shine, reflected the bank's opulence. This was not a place for just anyone. Only high-net-worth clients found their way through its heavy glass doors, and the staff ensured that anyone who didn't fit the part was treated accordingly. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, save for the occasional hum of printers and the soft clinking of expensive watches against desks. At the customer service counter, a well-dressed banker named Martin adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at the line of customers with a faint sneer. He was in his early 40s, with perfectly combed hair and a practiced smile that rarely reached his eyes. Martin had built his career on charm and ambition, but he reserved his best service for clients who wore designer suits and Rolexes. At that moment, the front door opened and a man stepped inside, drawing immediate attention. His clothes were wrinkled and worn, an old button-up shirt with a frayed collar, jeans that had seen better days, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. The man walked up to the counter, his expression calm. "Good morning," he said. "I'd like to speak with someone about opening an account." Martin glanced at him, barely disguising his disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," the man replied. "But I was hoping someone could help me." Martin smirked. "I'm afraid we only assist clients who meet certain financial thresholds. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our local branches?" He pointed toward the door. "There's a Standard Bank just a few blocks away." The man didn't flinch. "I'm familiar with your policies," he said calmly. "I assure you, I'm more than qualified." Martin raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "Is that so? And what kind of account are you looking to open?" "A business account," the man replied. "With a sizable deposit." Martin leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "And how sizable are we talking?" "Our minimum balance for business accounts is quite high, perhaps higher than you're accustomed to." The man tilted his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Try me." Martin chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll tell you what, if you can provide proof of the deposit, we'll be happy to accommodate you. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't waste our time." The man reached into his bag and pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen a few times and held it up for Martin to see. The banker's confident smirk vanished instantly. On the screen was an account balance that made his stomach drop. Billions of dollars in liquid assets, neatly displayed in bold numbers. Martin's face turned pale. His eyes darted back to the man, suddenly realizing who he was standing in front of. "Mr. Musk," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't recognize you." Elon Musk slipped his phone back into his pocket, his expression calm but sharp. "I figured as much. It's interesting how quickly your attitude changed once you saw a number you liked." Martin swallowed hard. "Please accept my sincerest apologies. But I didn't mean to be rude. If I had known..." Elon raised a hand to stop him. "That's the problem, isn't it? You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Do you think every successful person walks around wearing a three-piece suit and carrying a briefcase?" Martin opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. "Here's the thing," Elon continued. "I wasn't just here to open an account. I was testing how your institution treats its clients, especially those who don't fit the typical profile. And I have to say, I'm disappointed." Martin's heart sank. "Mr. Musk, please. I assure you this was a misunderstanding. Let me make it right." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "You'll get your chance. But first, I want to speak to the branch manager." Martin's eyes widened. "Right away, sir." He turned and practically sprinted toward the manager's office, sweat beading on his forehead. As Martin disappeared down the hallway, several customers who had witnessed the exchange whispered among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, snapping photos of Elon. Word was spreading fast. Within minutes, the branch manager, a middle-aged man named Richard, appeared, his face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Musk," he said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to have you here. I understand there was a mix-up. Please allow us to correct this." Elon shook his hand but didn't soften his tone. "Richard, I'm sure you've built a fine team here. But you should know that how your staff treats people reflects directly on your leadership. I've seen enough today to suggest that you might want to revisit your training protocols." Richard nodded vigorously. "You're absolutely right, sir. We'll implement immediate changes. Customer service is our top priority." "I'll hold you to that," Elon said. "In the meantime, I'll be taking my business elsewhere. But before I go, I want to make one thing clear. Respect should never be conditional. It's not something reserved for those who look wealthy or important. It's something every human being deserves." With that, Elon turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the entire bank in stunned silence. As the door closed behind him, Martin leaned heavily against the counter, his face ashen. He knew that this moment would haunt him for a long time. Outside, Elon smiled to himself as he slipped on a pair of sunglasses. Sometimes, the best way to expose a flawed system was to experience it firsthand. He had no doubt that Prestige First Bank would be scrambling to change its ways, and if they didn't, well, the court of public opinion would take care of that. He strolled down the street, blending back into the city's energy. There were plenty of lessons to be taught, and Elon Musk had no intention of stopping anytime soon. Martin stood behind the counter, still frozen with disbelief, his mind racing to process what had just happened. The murmurs in the bank grew louder as customers speculated about what they had witnessed. Some whispered in awe, while others quickly opened their phones, sharing the story on social media. Within minutes, the hashtags #ElonUnmasked and #BankScandal began trending. Pictures of Elon in his casual clothes, standing at the counter while Martin looked on in shock, spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly, eager to cover another instance of how judgment and prejudice had backfired spectacularly. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The manager, Richard, ushered Martin into his office, shutting the door behind them with a resounding thud. "Martin," Richard began, his voice low but filled with barely controlled anger, "do you realize what you've done?" "I had no idea it was him," Martin stammered. "He looked ordinary. How was I supposed to know?" Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. "That's exactly the point. You treated him like garbage because you thought he was beneath you. If you had shown even a shred of decency, we wouldn't be in this mess." Martin opened his mouth to defend himself, but Richard cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Do you have any idea how bad this will be for the bank's reputation? We pride ourselves on being an elite institution, but now the entire world thinks we're snobs who humiliate customers." He grabbed his phone and scrolled through the already mounting social media posts. "Look at this. Elon Musk exposed how Prestige First Bank treats ordinary people. What a disgrace. We're going viral for all the wrong reasons." Martin sank into the chair, his confidence evaporating. "What do we do now?" "We clean up the mess," Richard snapped. "You'll be issuing a formal apology, for starters. We'll put out a public statement, but that might not be enough. If Mr. Musk decides to take this further, it could be disastrous." Meanwhile, outside the bank, Elon leaned casually against a lamppost, his phone buzzing with notifications. Friends, business associates, and journalists bombarded him with messages. Some offered praise, while others asked for an exclusive interview. He ignored most of them, satisfied that the lesson had already taken root. He had seen this kind of arrogance too many times before, people in positions of power using their status as a weapon against those they considered beneath them. It wasn't just frustrating, it was dangerous. But today had been a chance to challenge that mindset in a way no press conference or speech ever could. As he strolled down the street, his phone rang. It was Sarah, one of his closest advisors. "Elon," she said, her voice crackling with excitement, "the internet is going wild. News outlets are picking up the story everywhere. This is bigger than we anticipated." "I figured it would be," Elon said with a chuckle. "Hopefully, it makes people think twice about how they treat others." Do you want to issue a formal statement? Sarah asked. No need, Elon replied. The story speaks for itself. Let the world draw its own conclusions. But we might want to prepare for the bank's response. They'll try to spin this. Understood, Sarah said. By the way, several advocacy groups have reached out. They're interested in partnering with you to push for reforms in the financial sector, better treatment of all customers, regardless of appearance or status. Now that, Elon said, his eyes lighting up, is worth exploring. Let's set up some meetings. Back at the bank, the fallout was swift. By the next morning, Prestige First Bank had issued a public apology, but it did little to stem the tide of criticism. Customers flooded their social media accounts with negative reviews and comments, demanding accountability. Several high-profile clients quietly withdrew their accounts, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. In a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation, Richard held a press conference in the bank's grand lobby, flanked by Martin and several other senior staff members. We at Prestige First Bank deeply regret the incident that took place yesterday, Richard began, his tone measured but contrite. We failed to uphold our commitment to providing excellent service to all our clients. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Musk and anyone else who may have felt disrespected by our actions. Effective immediately, we will implement new training protocols to ensure this never happens again. Journalists peppered him with questions, their cameras flashing. Mr. Richard, do you believe this incident is indicative of a deeper culture problem at the bank? One reporter asked. Richard cleared his throat. We are taking a hard look at our internal culture. This has been a wake-up call. Change is coming. Standing off to the side, Martin could feel the weight of every camera lens focused on him. His palms were sweaty, his heart pounding. He knew that his face was already plastered across the internet, labeled as the snobbish banker who had humiliated Elon Musk. There was no escape from it now. For the next several weeks, Prestige First Bank scrambled to regain public trust. They launched new community initiatives, partnered with advocacy groups, and promised to become a more inclusive institution. But the damage was done. Meanwhile, Elon turned his attention to the broader issue. He met with advocacy groups, consumer protection agencies, and financial industry leaders to discuss systemic change. Together, they developed a campaign called Equal Access, aimed at promoting fairness and respect in all customer interactions, regardless of wealth or appearance. The campaign quickly gained traction, with other financial institutions pledging to adopt its principles. Billboards and ads appeared across the country, featuring the campaign's slogan, "Respect is for everyone." Claire, a young entrepreneur who had once been denied service at another high-end bank, was among the first to speak out in support of the campaign. I've been in situations like Mr. Musk's, she said in a televised interview. The way you're treated can change your entire experience. This campaign isn't just about banking, it's about basic human decency. The movement grew rapidly, sparking conversations about fairness and empathy across industries. Stories poured in from people who had faced discrimination based on their appearance, reinforcing the importance of equal access. One afternoon, Elon sat in his office, reviewing the latest progress reports on the campaign. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. You might want to see this. It was a link to a video from Prestige First Bank. Richard and Martin stood side by side, announcing that they had not only embraced the Equal Access campaign but were also donating a significant portion of their profits to organizations supporting financial inclusion. Elon smiled, knowing that real change was finally happening. It had taken one small act, a single walk into a snobby bank, to ignite a movement. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, and looked out at the city skyline. The world was far from perfect, but every now and then, it offered a chance to set things right. And those were the moments Elon lived for. The momentum behind the Equal Access campaign reached a level no one had anticipated. Social media continued to buzz with stories from people across the country, many recounting their experiences with discrimination in banks, restaurants, and other public spaces. It became clear that Elon's decision to unmask himself had struck a deep cultural nerve. This wasn't just a story about one man exposing a flaw in a bank's policy. It was a movement demanding fairness, dignity, and respect for all. Across the financial sector, executives began taking notice. Banks that had long clung to their reputation for exclusivity suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Customers demanded transparency, insisting on new policies that ensured equal treatment regardless of socioeconomic status. Some banks resisted, but others saw the writing on the wall and scrambled to adapt. Elon continued to work behind the scenes, meeting with key leaders from both advocacy groups and corporate giants. His message was simple: no more judgments based on appearance. No more gatekeeping disguised as elite service. His efforts soon caught the attention of policymakers in Washington, D.C. A congressional committee invited him to testify about consumer protection and how discrimination in financial institutions affected access to basic services. It was a rare public appearance for Elon, who preferred to let his actions speak for themselves, but he knew the importance of this opportunity. The hearing was broadcast live on multiple networks, with millions tuning in to watch. Elon sat at the long table, his calm demeanor contrasting with the seriousness of the proceedings. Cameras flashed as the committee chair began the session. "Mr. Musk, thank you for joining us today," she said. "Your recent experience at Prestige First Bank has sparked a nationwide conversation about fairness and access in the financial industry. We'd like to hear your perspective." Elon leaned into the microphone. "Thank you for having me. What happened at the bank was just one small example of a much larger problem. For years, we've seen a culture of exclusion in industries that should be open to everyone. Banking is supposed to be about helping people build their future, providing access to opportunities and services. But too often, it becomes a tool for gatekeeping, where people are judged based on how they look or how they dress, rather than their potential." Several committee members nodded in agreement. Elon continued, "The goal of the Equal Access campaign is simple: treat every person with the same respect, regardless of their background or perceived wealth. That's not just good business, it's basic human decency. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for fair treatment." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. One representative leaned forward. "Mr. Musk, what do you think needs to change? What can we, as lawmakers, do to support this initiative?" "There are two key steps," Elon replied. "First, we need stronger regulations to protect consumers from discrimination in financial services. That includes holding institutions accountable when they fail to treat customers fairly. Second, we need education and training programs, because change starts with people. If we can teach empathy and respect, we'll see real progress." Applause broke out from the audience, a rare occurrence in such a formal setting. Even the committee members seemed moved by Elon's passion and clarity. Following the hearing, the Equal Access campaign gained even more traction. Banks and corporations pledged millions of dollars to support diversity and inclusion training. A new bill, dubbed the Fair Access Act, was introduced in Congress, aiming to set higher standards for customer service in the financial sector. For Richard and Martin at Prestige First Bank, the shift was personal. What had started as a nightmare quickly became an opportunity for redemption. Under Elon's guidance, they implemented sweeping changes at the bank, mandatory empathy training, regular audits to ensure fair treatment, and community outreach programs designed to bridge the gap between the institution and the people it served. Martin, who had once been known as the snobbish banker, became one of the strongest advocates for change. Humbled by his experience, he dedicated himself to mentoring younger staff, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. "I learned the hard way," Martin said during a company-wide meeting. "It's not about how much money someone has. It's about who they are as a person. If we focus on that, we'll all be better for it." Meanwhile, Elon's personal life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though he continued to receive letters and emails from people thanking him for what he had done. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a single mother named Angela, who had been denied a small business loan because she didn't look professional enough. After hearing Elon's story, the bank had reconsidered and approved her loan. Angela wrote, "Because of you, I was able to start my bakery. It's been my dream for years, and now it's a reality. Thank you for reminding the world that everyone deserves a chance." Elon folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with other messages like it. Each one was a reminder that the fight for fairness was far from over, but it was a fight worth continuing. Months later, the Equal Access campaign held its first national summit, bringing together leaders from various industries to discuss how they could create more inclusive environments. The event was packed with CEOs, policymakers, community organizers, and everyday citizens who had been inspired by the movement. Claire, now a successful entrepreneur, was one of the keynote speakers. Standing on the stage, she looked out at the crowd, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "I used to believe that the world only opened its doors to people who fit a certain mold," she said. "But thanks to this movement, I've learned that we can change the mold. We can build a world where no one feels invisible, where every person is given a fair shot." The crowd erupted into applause, and Elon, seated in the front row, nodded with approval. As the summit wrapped up, Elon stood outside the conference center, watching the sun set over the city skyline. Sarah approached him, a tablet in hand. "Another successful event," she said, smiling. "The impact you've made is incredible." Elon shrugged modestly. "It's not about me. It's about the people we've helped along the way." Sarah glanced at the tablet. "There's already talk of expanding equal access globally. Banks in Europe and Asia want to join the movement." Elon smiled. "Good. Let's keep pushing. There's still a lot of work to do." He took one last look at the city before walking toward his car, his mind already racing with ideas for the next phase of the campaign. For Elon, this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning.